Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 100 of the Alabama Liberal Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about, does anything really change? Plus, artificial insanity. Now, right there, you heard in the title, this is the centennial episode of the Alabama Liberal Podcast, so you might be thinking, those long-suffering fans, some of whom may have been there since the first episode, many of whom might have come and gone, some might have picked it up over the course. You might be thinking, well, I bet he's got something really special for us today. He might have an interview, maybe co-host, or maybe even a debate. He used to do debates on his website. None of them were audio. They were text debates, but he might have something really big for us this time. Well, of course, expect the unexpected with the Alabama Liberal Podcast, because I don't have anything like that, and this episode's actually late. It was supposed to be May's episode, even though it's about a week late. It's about a week into June, and it'll probably be one of the shortest episodes I've ever done, which every time I talk about an episode being short, I kind of feel like one of those professors who's like, okay, class, you're being let out early today. You feel good. Like if you check an episode and it's an hour long or over an hour long, you might think like, oh, that's a time commitment, but you look and see an episode's 45 or something like that, then you think, oh, good, this is something I can get through pretty quick, which is kind of a funny way to think about your free time. I do feel like I'm letting the class out early for summer. And the reason, of course, that there wasn't an episode in May is because I really wanted the verdict for the Trump trial to come in. And I thought, the second that I do an episode, I'm going to say all these things and make predictions, and they're going to be immediately overturned with the Trump trial. The verdict will come back, and they'll be wondering why I didn't talk about it at all in that area. And then they didn't release the verdict until the very end of May. And then I kind of wanted to give it a few days just to see if there would be a reaction to it. I think many of us expected Trump to go absolutely butt fucking nuts. I almost wanted to give it a handful of days to be like, is he going to call for violence? Is he going to do something like that? But it actually makes sense that he may not do that, because I think he thinks his way out of all this is to be elected president. And if he goes out there in June, months before the presidential election, and starts saying, oh yeah, Alvin Bragg, he should be executed, and the judge, my followers should swarm on his house. If he does call for direct violence against some of these, which he's hinted at it and insinuated at it, he's released information about them, he seems to be encouraging it. But if he really comes out and directly calls for a civil war, directly calls for judges to be executed, you would think, I know America's kind of asleep, we're asleep in a lot of ways, but you would think at that point, even some of his biggest fans might be like, ooh, can we walk this back? You think that they might be okay with it after he's elected, which I feel like that's his goal, is to become elected, take office, and then do a lot of terrible things. But if he starts doing it before he's elected and before he has the power to do that, he's already in deep shit. The interesting thing about Trump is he's been indicted all these times. He's got 4 separate criminal trials going on. One just concluded. He was found guilty, 34 counts. And when that verdict was released, like most liberals in the country, I celebrated. He is guilty. And that's what we don't hear about from the news. We see it talked about like, oh, Republicans are saying this and Democrats saying that. I'm like, but is he guilty? And of course he's guilty. There's no other way around it or to interpret it. For a guy who was indicted 90-something times, who has 4 separate criminal trials in various stages of development, who has now just been convicted on 34 counts and awaiting sentencing, it's amazing how many crimes he continues to commit. I've never seen anybody who's on trial for something and then he violates gag orders, he threatens judges, he tries to release personal information about prosecutors, he's encouraging violence against people. He's basically saying, oh, if I were to be sentenced to jail, that's just too much for my followers to take. I would imagine they would do something at that point, like very clearly encouraging people to rise up. If he's in fact put in jail or even under house arrest, he is threatening people. He is saying, oh, my followers, there's no way they would tolerate that. That's too much for America to take. And he always used to do this. He did it in 2020. Well, if I lose, I imagine there'll be a civil war, kind of floating these ideas out there, which is all bullshit. I don't really think the majority of his followers have any interest in committing more crimes on his behalf. They saw what happened to the people in January the 6th. He did not pardon them, even though he could have. He's talked about he will pardon them if he's reelected, which is incredible that somebody would even float that out. It's kind of like the worst of both worlds. He didn't do it when he could have, but then he's saying he will do it if he's reelected. So it's almost double hideous. The people are not benefiting from it that violated the law on his behalf, and they ought to know better by now than to believe a word that guy says. But everybody else who didn't do that, 70 million odd people who voted for him and then didn't show up to the Capitol to raise hell and storm, those people ought to be like, we really have second thoughts about voting for this guy. It's kind of typical in his playbook, once again, to threaten if he is punished or held accountable in any way to threaten real violence and hurt people if anything's done about that. And what's interesting is all the Republicans, oh, isn't this terrible? This is unfair. This is biased. I was really disappointed in Mitt Romney. The theme of this episode is, does anything really change in the United States? These issues and these people, does anything really rotate out? And Mitt Romney went back to his default state of being a spineless weasel with terrible political instincts. We saw him do some good things the last few years of the Trump administration. Now he's gone back to giving Biden terrible advice, which first thing he said was, I think Biden should pardon Donald Trump, which might be one of the worst fucking pieces of political advice I've ever heard. I don't know anybody working in politics right now who would have given Biden that advice. You instantly lose a lot of people who vote for you. I don't think you pick up any new voters. The people who would be delighted that Biden pardoned Trump, they're going to vote for Trump. And the moderates and swing voters would look at it and be like, well, Biden must not have thought Trump did anything that bad, or he wouldn't have pardoned him. Like, if he really thought he was this crazy insurrectionist who's going to plunge the country into a civil war, why in the hell would he pardon him and let him completely off the hook? That makes no sense if he really believes he's that dangerous. So he goes out on the campaign trail and says Trump is an existential threat to democracy. He is the biggest threat we've had since Hitler, maybe since the Civil War. But why did you pardon him? If you think he's that dangerous, then somebody of that description is the Joker from Batman. They belong in a maximum security prison. Throw away the key. Don't let them out ever. The United States has one supermax prison. It's in Colorado. I think it's called ADX Florence. And a lot of presidents have things named after them, like Reagan Airport or Obama Boulevard or certain high schools and things. And people said, well, is Trump going to have anything named after him? And I think a great thing would be to rename the Florence Supermax prison Trump Prison, and then go there and lock him up in it, put him in it. And, you know, he loves things that are the biggest and exclusive and the only, say, it's the only Supermax prison in America. It's huge. It's very exclusive. Only the most dangerous people go here. I'm very dangerous. I don't know if you know that, but I'm very, very dangerous. Him being a white supremacist prison gang leader inside the scariest prison in the United States would be a good way for him to end his career in politics, end his life. I don't know, whatever you want to say, at the very end of whatever he's at right now. And other than that, there's a huge trash dump in Los Angeles. The biggest trash dump in America is in LA. It's like kind of east of Los Angeles. And I think maybe you could use trash dump and then do a portmanteau where it's just Trump. Be like, it's the biggest trash dump in America, the biggest garbage ever. Most garbage goes here. I don't know if you know this, but it's very exclusive. It's a very big garbage dump. Other than that, I can't think of anything that should be named after him. It's incredible to watch Republicans like Romney first say that Biden should pardon him, then turn around and go Alvin Bragg. He committed political miscarriage and this is political malpractice. He should have never brought this case forward. What I'm not hearing them say is that Donald Trump is innocent. That's what I'm not hearing them say, is that Donald Trump is not guilty of these charges. Cries, oh, this is such a miscarriage of justice and this is terrible and how they let such a brazenly political thing. Nowhere is he saying Donald Trump is innocent of these charges. You can't say it. Lightning would hit you where you stand. Everybody knows he's fucking guilty. They know that he did this. And instead of them saying he's innocent, he's framed, this is a setup, they're saying the charges shouldn't have been brought at all. It's brazenly political. It's biased. It's unfair. Unfair, I keep hearing that shit. As if there's anything fair about letting this guy just commit all the crimes he wants to and never prosecuting him. Like, how is that basic fairness? I wouldn't be allowed to do it. You wouldn't be allowed to do it. And they keep comparing it to Bill Clinton. Kind of ridiculous because Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, they were under investigation relentlessly for 30 years. Whitewater and all of the stuff from Arkansas that Kenneth Starr dug through, and Starr even admitted the only thing I could ever find that they really did wrong was the blowjob. Clinton got a blowjob and then he lied about it, becoming the 10 billionth married man to lie about something like that. Monica Lewinsky wasn't underage. It was consensual sex. She approached him. They both said this at the time, and then they had sex in office, and it is perjury for him to lie about it under oath, although they played some word games. You know, was it sexual relations? Was it sexual intercourse? There was a lot of gray areas about that, and it would have been amazing if he'd have just said, this is none of your damn business. It has nothing to do with my job. I'm fully capable of doing my job, and it's none of your business. What Trump did is not to lie about having an affair, and I don't think that the right-wing people are being remotely sincere. First of all these people that tried to put Bill Clinton in in jail for having an affair with Monica Lewinsky and then committing perjury. They were all having affairs at the time. Henry Hyde was having an affair. Newt Gingrich was having an affair. Dennis Hassert was a child molester. He'd molested kids. Everybody was doing worse things at that time. That's not really what we're talking about with Trump. What we're talking about is that he used campaign donations to pay Stormy Daniels to shut up. It's about hush money, and it's about misappropriating campaign funds, which politicians get in trouble for this, and they do go to jail for this kind of thing. These are financial crimes. This is not, I was under oath and I lied about something personal and maybe I shouldn't have done it, which that kind of thing doesn't usually result in criminal charges. You can be held in contempt, you could pay a fine, but perjury for something like lying about an affair is pretty damn rare. Usually perjury is prosecuted when there's some very serious crime and you've just totally fabricated some bullshit and lied about something. And you gave somebody an alibi that was committing murders and then you're found out. So this is pretty rare that somebody would be locked up for that. Financial crimes are different. Trump used campaign funds and diverted those to Stormy Daniels as hush money so she wouldn't talk about an affair. That is different. And Michael Cohen, his personal attorney, has already been to jail for this shit. So all these people be like, it would be outrageous to lock Trump up. Michael Cohen's already been to jail for doing this stuff on Trump's behalf, orchestrated to do it on his behalf. Now, I freely admit that this case in New York, it isn't the strongest case against Trump. It's not the worst things he's done. The documents case is much more of a slam dunk. Oh, but that shit's being blocked. The coup attempt brought by federal prosecutors is much more of a slam dunk. Oh, but that shit's being blocked. So you have a Trump-loving judge down in Florida blocking one of those cases, and the Supreme Court, which said, oh yeah, we'll hear this case that they never should have agreed to hear. 3 of the judges have a goddamn conflict with. Really, 5 of the judges. Because you've got Clarence Thomas's wife, who was cheering on the insurrection. You've got Samuel Alito saying he won't recuse himself, even though he absolutely should. 3 of the 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by Trump himself. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett shouldn't hear this case, given that he appointed them. Kavanaugh, he basically told the FBI not to really investigate these rape allegations, to allow Kavanaugh to be on the Supreme Court. That's how close they were at the time. Gorsuch basically stole Merrick Garland's Supreme Court seat to give it to Gorsuch, and Barrett, he rammed her through when Justice Ginsburg died only 6 weeks before the 2020 election. He had to sort of kind of bend the rules for all 3 of them to get on the court, or they never would have been. It's pretty fucking ridiculous to be like, well, this is outrageous. Trump's been prosecuted for such a minor crime. Okay, it's not as strong as the other 3. The other 3 are definitely worse. The coup attempt, most of all, probably the worst of the things he's been accused of. But the other ones are locked in red tape and gridlock, and they can't get through the docket. I admit that it's a little bit like arresting Al Capone for tax evasion, but everybody knows the motherfucker's guilty. Oh, well, isn't this ridiculous to arrest Al Capone for tax evasion when he's killed everybody? It's like, yeah, but he belongs in jail. He is a criminal, and you agree that he belongs in jail, and he did do it. He did commit tax evasion. So in Trump's case, it's a little bit like, how absurd that these charges. You know, it would be different if that were it, but it's not it. Tax fraud, charity fraud, university fraud. 8 separate people in his 2016 campaign arrested, many of them in jail for Russian collusion on his behalf, orchestrated by him. When they say the FBI's got a thing against Trump, I thought, yes, that's who they were hired to catch. The FBI, white-collar crime, terrorism, espionage. Trump is an insurrectionist who tried to commit a coup to take over the White House. That's terrorism. He's consistently tried to orchestrate plots to either stop a certification of an election, or doesn't seem to think it was a big deal that his followers were chanting, kill Mike Pence. I mean, fuck, that is terrorism. Then the white-collar stuff is a laundry list. Then the espionage thing, all of his ties to Russia. The only thing he doesn't do that the FBI investigates is serial killing. They also check out serial killers that we know of. He's never been a serial killer, but I almost wouldn't surprise me at this point. I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan being like, oh, Hillary Clinton has probably killed people. I'm not saying anything like that, but I'm just saying 3 of the 4 main things that the FBI checks out, he fits the bill. So it would almost be negligence of them not to check this guy out and not to see what he's up to and what he's doing. I'm not hearing anybody who's bemoaning travesty that is Trump being held accountable say, oh, he definitely didn't do this. They forged his name. They made up these documents. He didn't even know Stormy Daniels. He never had an affair with her. He never told people to divert campaign funds to pay her hush money. Nobody can say that shit because it's not true. It would be brazenly lying to say that he didn't orchestrate this. And yes, there have absolutely been people in the Democratic Party who have been in prison for a lot less than that. Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama, the last Democratic governor Alabama had, he spent years in a Louisiana prison for bullshit. He was trying to get the lottery to come to Alabama, but that wasn't anything that benefited him personally. He certainly didn't raise the funds to pay it to a porn star to get her to shut up about having an affair with him. And yet he spent years in a Louisiana prison despite having no criminal record whatsoever. So when people say, well, it would be inappropriate if Trump ever went to jail for these charges, considering that he was a huge politician and considering that he has no list of violent criminal behavior, I think it's a real debatable point. He has no history of violent criminal behavior, but Don Siegelman definitely didn't, and he went to a Louisiana prison for years. So we in Alabama know that it's bullshit when people say Trump shouldn't be held accountable and it would be outrageous, and we'll tell that to Rod Blagojevich, the Illinois governor who was Democratic, and he went to prison. A lot of other politicians that are Democrats have been held accountable for a lot less than this. And this goes back to the thing of, does anything in this country really change? If we go back and look at everything people are talking about right now, and sometimes, I don't know if you'll find this hopeful or depressing. You could look at it both ways. Trump is not new, and there's been people like him in American history before. Now, I say that right out loud, and the audience may be divided in half. Some of you might say, that's really good news, because that means that there have been people like him before and they've all been defeated. So we know that they can be defeated. We know that they don't have to win. It's not like it's just a fait accompli that a guy like this is going to get what he wants no matter what. It's good news that he's been defeated in the past, other versions of him. But other people might look at that and say, that's depressing, because I thought he was this abhorrent anomaly, this once in a century evil that comes along, and we're now finding out that maybe that's not true, that there have been similar figures to him in the past. Some examples. Everybody that votes for him, you can ask them, why are you voting for this guy? Why do you still support this guy? How can you still support this guy? And they come back and say, 34 convictions. That's 34 reasons to vote for him. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. Somebody becoming a convicted felon, why are you being so stubborn in supporting this guy? How can you be so stubborn in supporting this guy? Is it really just ego? And it is. A lot of people don't want to admit that they were wrong. I've had an episode in years past talking about sunk cost fallacy, explains Trump voters. A lot of them absolutely refuse to admit they've made a bad decision. They're permanently living November the 8th, 2016. That's where they're set. Just like Jimmy Buffett is always on island time, and for him it's always summer in Margaritaville. Well, they're permanently living November 8th, 2016, where liberals look like they've been gut punched. They show the photos of Hillary's campaign headquarters in New York, and they show young women in Brooklyn who are like, I'm young, I'm free, I'm single, I can have an abortion, everything's great. My life is amazing. It's way better than yours is out there in Stickville, or the over 50-year-old women who don't have the freedom that I had, and you should be happy for me instead of jealous as hell, which most of you are. It shows them bawling tears that Hillary's been defeated. All of Trump's angry, hateful, jealous base, they're getting high off those fumes. They're just loving. The liberals were in misery that night, and they love the fact that a lot of people said Hillary was going to win, and then she didn't. They'd be like, ha, you book smart know-nothings, you elitists, you discounted me, and y'all all thought I was crazy. Well, Trump won. He won. Yeah, it was a technicality because the Electoral College, and they went against the will of the people when they should have seated Hillary anyway because she won by 3 million votes. On a technicality, he won, and he won. And they love the fact that they're able to punch the elitist New York Times reporters or whoever in their mind is their imaginary villain in the face and be like, ha, you were sad, but my guy won. We're all happy. From that point on, they've made increasingly terrible decisions to basically justify voting for somebody that is horrible, that there is no redeeming qualities. He is irredeemable. He's Prince Joffrey from Game of Thrones. When his Uncle Tyrion says the king is a lost cause, that's Trump. Trump is a lost cause. You can't save somebody like this. You can't redirect them. You can't make them better. His fans don't want to make him better, which is the truly terrifying thing. They're not even the woman trapped in an abusive relationship who's like, you don't know him like I know him. You don't know he can be so sensitive. He can be so caring. They aren't really saying that. They like how hateful and mean-spirited and vindictive he is. And those currents that are propelling him, they've been out in America for a very long time. He's George Wallace. He's some of the 1960s and 50s politicians that were dead against integration and said integration is terrible. You won't have a country left. Trump has literally used some of the anti-integration rhetoric in the Southeast. He's used that in his campaigns where he says, if you don't elect me, you won't have a country left. What the hell is he talking about? You won't have a country left. He's talking about open borders. So this bullshit where the Bolshevik Hispanic horde on the border is going to overflow the country. And when people say, I hate communism, I hate Marxism, they're really saying, I hate Muslims, I hate Latin Americans, I hate Africa. When they say, I hate that Kenyan socialist Muslim, Barack Obama, that Marxist, it's the African part that they're really fixated on. They call him a Marxist, they really mean an African, is what they're saying. That rhetoric of being against people, the hordes coming over the border, that's been trotted out for decades. Anytime America has ever had a demagogue come into power, we got to kick out the Chinese. When they were building the railroads back in the 1800s, oh, the Chinese, they're terrible. They passed a law at one point to exclude Chinese people from immigrating to the States. And they've done this throughout our history. At one point, there was a lot of anti-Catholic prejudice, and people didn't want the Irish and the Italians to come here. And this stuff bubbles up whenever people feel that the economy's out of their control or they're going to lose jobs. It's not really about that. A lot of times the economy is actually pretty great when we have high periods of immigration, as it's been great right now. But it's a scapegoat to say the world is shifting away from us and we can't stand it. Our values, whatever they are, and I don't even know if they can articulate them at this point. You ask conservatives, what are your values? Well, we're military conservatives. No, you're not. You're supporting a guy who's a Russian puppet. Donald Trump would betray the United States in 2 seconds. He has betrayed the United States in 2 seconds. The people saying he stood up to China, how? By having a Chinese bank account with $25 million in it. China got him to pay more taxes than we did. He paid $700 in American taxes. He paid more than that in Chinese taxes. Oh no, he stood up to China. How? He went back on a TikTok ban. Jeffrey Yass, the billionaire that's given him a lot of campaign money, he's a funder of TikTok. He doesn't want TikTok kicked out of the United States. And Trump says, oh yeah, I think TikTok, I don't know, I may have to reverse myself on a ban about that. Truth Social is funded by Chinese money. The seed money that got Truth Social going is Chinese money. You don't think this guy would betray America in 2 seconds? Well, you know what? If only there was something I had to prove it. Oh yeah, there is. There's the first impeachment where it wasn't just blackmailing Ukraine for stuff about Joe Biden, trying to get dirt on Joe Biden. It was also calling up China and asking them directly for election help. He wanted stuff from China about Joe and Hunter Biden. Why on earth would they want to help Trump be reelected if they thought he was the tougher one on them? If they really believed that he was going to hurt them and help America at every turn, the so-called America First, why would they help him be reelected? So Trump knew that was bullshit. The America First tagline, that has been around for decades. That started out with Charles Lindbergh and a bunch of Nazi sympathizers back in the 30s that wanted to keep the United States out of World War II. They didn't want America to challenge the Nazis. They liked what the Germans were doing. Charles Lindbergh and others, they were anti-Semitic and they didn't want America to spend any money. They were very isolationist. So they started the America First campaign. So Trump literally took Nazi sympathizer rhetoric, America First, and then reappropriated it into this century, which you never see this talked about on the news. The origins of that and where it came from. This is how he knows it will be effective, because it was effective back then. It's effective now. Make America great again. Trump's going to make America great again. That's an old Reagan slogan. Reagan used that slogan. There's nothing they love more than Reagan, and that's why they love comparing Joe Biden to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter's the only Democratic president in about a century who wasn't reelected. He's the only one-term wonder that we've had, and pretty much the only one that is kind of sort of thought of as mediocre. Now, me and other liberals have debates about this. They defend this guy to the death, but I don't think that it's necessarily a good use of time. He may have been a better president than he's been remembered for in history, but I think if you asked people, he would be the only Democratic president that's even in range of average, mediocre, not fantastic, unlike FDR, Harry Truman, JFK, LBJ, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and I believe Joe Biden, once he gets out of office, will be remembered as a better than average president who didn't get his due. Not getting it right now, that's for sure. So I think they love the idea of Joe Biden as Jimmy Carter because he's a one-termer and they can massage him into a failure. And then, of course, Reagan had that big blowout in 1980 and then an even bigger blowout in 1984. So in their minds, they're constantly searching for that Ronald Reagan apparent. Trump's not that. They keep trying to make him that, but Ronald Reagan didn't lose the popular vote by millions both times. You know, he never had to run for a third term because he wasn't denied re-election in 1984. He won a 49-state blowout. The last really huge presidential blowout we've had was 1984. So Trump isn't that. Maybe they think that just calling guys named Ron and putting them in power, like, oh, here's Ron Paul, oh, here's Ron DeSantis, just chasing around for the next Ron that they can shove into power. But they love that mentality because the country's not that anymore. The days when they could win landslide popular vote elections and electoral college blowouts in the 80s, they haven't done that in decades. They've only won the popular vote once in the last 7 elections. So literally, they're trying to go back to this period where they were truly popular, and they have great nostalgia for that. So Trump plays on that with the Make America Great Again slogan. A lot of really old people probably have forgotten that was a Reagan slogan, but it stirs up that nostalgic feeling that he's constantly going for. Bring back Gone with the Wind. That was something he literally said at one of his rallies. Do I think Trump, billionaire New Yorker who never stepped outside Manhattan until he was running for president, do I think he really fucking likes Gone with the Wind? No, I don't. They showed a list of movies that he loved when he was running, and it was like Goodfellas, and it was all these Italian mafia movies. Goodfellas, The Godfather, Citizen Kane, because it was the billionaire media mogul and all this shit. That's what he relates to. That cornball Gone with the Wind shit, that really isn't something that he would gravitate towards. But he's saying that because his rube crowds are like, oh yes, finally, this guy sees us and he gets what we want, which is to recenter the country around a vision of America that probably never was. People have nostalgia for things. The reason nostalgia is so deadly is because people are not remembering things clearly. And I hear people do this in my personal life. They'll be like, oh, remember when? And they'll give a story about way back in the day in Alabama. And I was like, that's not really how it happened. You know, there was something a lot worse that went down than what they're describing. Like, they might describe something that was actually really a terrible event, but because they were young, everything's better when you're young. You're young, you're mobile, you're getting around, you've got youth. These things that when we are teenagers and in our 20s, they seem like terribly anxious time periods. I remember a lot more anxiety back then than I have now, right? But I don't remember the anxiety, right? You just remember, oh, I was young and this happened and that was great and I was more mobile, I was more active, I could climb a wall and do certain things that you can't necessarily do the older you get, and all that seems fantastic. And then you leave out the part where, oh yeah, somebody did get shot at that. I'm massaging out the violence or whatever happened. And a lot of the older people that Trump's playing on, he's playing on this vision of America that they can just barely remember, this 50s and 60s vision. If they were even alive at that time, they maybe have been children. So like, oh yeah, we did have this great picnic back in the 60s, and that might have been a lynching, but they've forgotten the part where there was violence going on around whatever they're remembering. They're just remembering the kind of the Andy Griffith show, right? Like everything is wonderful and rosy and always enough food to eat and everybody's got a job and there's no bums and there's no black people around. And then right off the corner of the Andy Griffith show, you're not seeing where there may have been a lynching or some people were trying to get voting rights and they might have been killed over it. All those things are sort of airbrushed off the screen. And he's really appealing to people who have nostalgia for something that never was. And when I talk about does anything in America really change? So there's Trump, who's using the anti-integration rhetoric of the 50s and 60s all the way back to the Jefferson Davises of the Civil War era. All the people who say, if only we could get the federal government off our backs, we could have the country we really want. And you hear people from old newsreels say, well, the black people are happy. It's just the northern agitators, it's the white liberals, it's the Jews, it's all these people coming here and they're stirring stuff up and they're making all these waves and black people are happy. They're actually being used by these people trying to give them rights. And actually the white people trying to give them rights, they're the real bad guys because they're using these poor people. You hear people say that shit and you want to just laugh. You just want to say, this is outrageous. But they're still doing that today. They trot out Tim Scott, who's making arguments like that. Like people like Tim Scott, you've got to be kidding me that you're now Strom Thurmond. All the shit that the Strom Thurmonds would have said way back in the 50s, 60s, well, black people are happy. It's just that the Northerners telling them to vote and asking them to be in integrated schools and trying to get them to do these things. And now they're trotting out their Republicans who are saying the same damn thing. Like, well, if it wasn't for the New York Times and some of the Jewish people, they've just swapped the names of the Jewish people that they think are controlling the world. Back in the day, it was the Rothschilds. They're like, oh, the Rothschild family, they're behind all this. They're orchestrating all these plots. Now it's George Soros. And so the same damn thing where you're coming up with Jewish Northern cabal that is somehow hurting the standard of living or whatever in these rural red states, they're just swapping the names out of who they say is behind all this shit. But they're using some very old and dated points. Marjorie Taylor Greene recently grilled Dr. Fauci in a way that was completely inappropriate. I thought, just when you think Republicans have hit the bottom, there is no bottom. It's a bottomless cavern. It's all the way down to the center of the earth, because just when you think, well, they can't get any lower than defending Trump right after he's just been convicted on 34 counts, oh no, they did. Now she's accusing Dr. Fauci of all these crazy things and basically told him he belongs in jail. I don't think that the doctors that prescribed tens of thousands of opioids and literally killed hundreds of people from opioid overdoses, I haven't seen a doctor treated like this in any other context. Larry Nassar, the child molester who was molesting Olympic athletes, our beloved Olympic athletes, and he's literally molesting them. I don't think he was talked to like this when he was on trial, like his literal trial. I don't think was as negative as what she was saying to Dr. Fauci, a guy merely doing his job. But it once again comes back to, oh, these federal government bureaucrats and the deep state, and they're controlling things and they're impinging on our civil liberties. Civil liberties, of course, meaning states, and really red states, blood red states, where the governor treats himself like a tyrant. They should be able to do whatever the hell they want, completely unimpeded. Listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene grill Dr. Fauci, you wouldn't think 1 million people had died from COVID. More than 1 million Americans had died from that. You would have think that he really pulled it out of his ass. Not since the Spanish flu have we had so many Americans die from a single pandemic. And she's acting like it was all bullshit. And that's how they're rewriting the narrative. And it's using this old dated language of the nefarious government bureaucrats overreaching into our state sovereignty and all of our states' rights being impeded and trampled on. And my fear is that people like Dr. Fauci, look, if you're a doctor, you've got a pretty good life in America. And it's almost like you don't even want to put your neck out there. You just say this shit is not worth it. And then you don't ever do anything remotely constructive. It's becoming to where the idiots are running the show so thoroughly and they're calling people before Congress. It's a joke that Marjorie Taylor Greene can issue subpoenas and talk about impeaching cabinet officials and things like that. This woman who was just barely allowed to even run for a second term is now the most powerful person in the House of Representatives. Like, are you fucking kidding me? This absolute buffoon. What does she even stand for other than I'm going to fuck up as much stuff as I possibly can? This family values conservative who got divorced her first term in office, whose husband literally has all these ethics violations where he raised money that he didn't report. This is a woman who should have been kicked out of office. And now she's able to issue a subpoena for Dr. Fauci or Alabama liberal or whoever she wants to, and then haul us before Congress and talk to us like she's fucking legitimate. Are you crazy? Like when I saw Hunter Biden getting grilled by Matt Gaetz, I thought, how's Matt Gaetz, the sex offender, even sitting there? There ought to be something to where to issue subpoenas from Congress, it can't be somebody who's under criminal investigation, which both Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz have been. Okay, they either are now or have been. And I don't think they should be able to just call me or Mark Zuckerberg or Hunter Biden or Dr. Fauci, the thankless government bureaucrat who's received death threats for doing his fucking job. I don't think they should be able to call them before Congress and then basically grill them and treat them like criminals. And by the way, once you get before Congress, you have to put up with that shit or you can be held in contempt of Congress. You could go to jail if you sass them too much or tell them what you really think about them, which is that they're a bunch of fucking buffoons who shouldn't be able to call you before there. We're living in this reality where the so-called family values conservative women like Marjorie Taylor Greene divorced first term, Lauren Boebert divorced first term, Joni Ernst divorced, Sarah Palin divorced, Megyn Kelly, the professional Karen who clutches her pearls every time something happens. Like, oh, my kids at school were taught about civil rights. I had to pull them out immediately. Divorced. These so-called family values Christian conservative women, the majority of them are either divorced or like Nikki Haley and Kristi Noem have had affairs. And so you want to look at these women and be like, who are you to lecture us or talk about this? Outed themselves as the ultimate hypocrites because when Bill Clinton had that Lewinsky thing, as I referred to earlier, every Republican woman in Alabama exploded. How can Hillary stand by this man? Why hasn't she divorced him? This woman makes me sick. How can anybody put up with this? He's tarnished the government. He's making our children learn about blowjobs on the 5 o'clock news. Back in the 90s, oh yeah, all of us kids, we're just like, oh man, I can't wait to watch the 5 o'clock news. I wonder what Tom Brokaw's going to say. You know, like none of us were fucking watching that shit. We watched whatever the hell we wanted to on Simpsons or South Park or things that were 10 times worse over on other channels. And they're like, oh, my poor little babies. They're learning about this on the nightly news like any family in America still watches the nightly news, or that they even did in the 90s, which we didn't. They acted like they needed a fainting couch because they were clutching their pearls talking about Bill Clinton has sullied the White House. He has ruined it by actually having sex in the White House. He has destroyed it. We need to burn it down and purge it. And how do we explain this to our kids? Who will think of the children. Same exact women say 34 reasons to vote for Donald Trump because he had 34 convictions for paying hush money to a porn star. Yes, I guess things do change in the sense that today's outraged conservative is tomorrow's apoplectic defender of the same damn sex crimes 10 times worse. So that is absolutely outrageous that Trump has now become their god, this guy who, and I've used this joke before, but he's lived his life like Caligula on spring break, and now he is representing the moral majority. You've got to be fucking kidding me. It's outrageous and stupid. And going back into all of these issues where they never seem to change, but the rhetoric seems to change around them. Abortion, that is an issue that we're still dealing with. I can't almost believe that we're still dealing with this 50 years on, where it was legal for my mother and then Gen X and then millennials, and now it's illegal for the younger members of Gen Z if they need it or whoever. Now we're going back to what it would have been more than half a century ago. You still hear people debating political correctness. Now they call it wokeness. I've been really good about not mentioning his name. 96, 97, 98, 99. I didn't mention Bill Maher's name once. But to hear him constantly say, we could all be canceled tomorrow. Well, you've been saying that for 30-something years. Almost 70. And not only have you not been canceled on real time, you now have a podcast where you're down in your basement. How the hell are they going to cancel you? What are they going to do? Shut off your internet? Is Spectrum going to cancel you? Oh, he can't record this podcast and post it online. I mean, who could stop him if they wanted to? All of his sponsors are people like condom stores and dildo shops and everything like that. What is Al's Tattoo Barn going to say? Oh, I didn't like what he said about this. I'm pulling my support. Nobody could cancel him if they wanted to. And he's been riding on this for 30 years that, oh, I could be canceled tomorrow. Well, you've been out there for a lot longer time than people who were not offensive at all. Conan O'Brien has lost several jobs, and he's not even remotely offensive, and he's been fired from all these jobs. Jay Leno's not explicitly political. David Letterman has retired. At the time that Bill started in the 90s, all of those talk show hosts are gone and have been gone for a while now. A whole new generation has cropped up, and he's still there, and he's still talking about the same things. And so when he talks about, well, wokeness is out of control, he said political correctness was out of control back in the 90s. Every single thing people say about wokeness today, they were saying about political correctness 30 years ago, 50 years ago. If you watch an old episode of All in the Family and they're having debates about political correctness and, oh, meathead, he's too liberal and he's too sensitive, this shit's been going on forever. The debate about feminism and women's rights, this has been going on since the 60s. Almost nothing that we're debating today hasn't been openly and directly debated since the 60s, because the Nepo babies and the new pharaohs I talked about in episode 99, they still control most of the money in this country. They still have gotten richer while the rest of us have gotten poorer. So even though most of the country believes in integrated schools, if the Koch brothers or whoever don't believe in it, they can funnel so much money into politicians that now school integration is a debated topic, and things that we thought we'd settled decades ago. Fossil fuels. I don't even remember how many times I've directly or indirectly referenced that this country is not doing anything about climate crisis. This year, you've had hundreds of tornadoes hit the Midwest. Oklahoma, one of the states that believes in climate crisis the least, has been ransacked by one tornado after another. Texas, the same thing. All the southern and Midwestern states that don't believe climate crisis is real, they're the ones most affected by it. Florida's sinking. Between sinkholes, flooding, and hurricanes, Florida is sinking into the ocean, and Texas is drier than a bone. Drought, forest fires, tornadoes, Texas and Oklahoma all over them, and yet the politicians that represent these states, climate crisis is a hoax. Hold on, a fucking tornado's tearing down my house. Give me just a second. It's getting to be ridiculous that because Ted Cruz is getting money from oil companies, he's like, climate crisis isn't real. Well, maybe not real for you, because you go to Cancun and you go on spring break when the rest of the state's freezing to death. When Texas is frozen and having a record snowstorm, which is unprecedented, a complete climate crisis event, hurricanes, snowstorms, months that they're not having droughts and forest fires, he's off in Cancun. So I guess for him, it's not really much of a reality. And all these politicians leading people down the road of, oh, all these liberal hoaxes, they're all bullshit and none of that's real and blah, blah, blah. They're not going to be there. When the shit really hits the fan, they're going to get in their private aircraft, fly to a country that's not affected by this, and they're going to leave their voters in the dust. When Florida is sinking into the ocean, Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott and all the other assholes that have been paid a bundle to block any meaningful climate change legislation by the oil companies, they'll get in their G5 and go wherever the hell they want to, wherever's not affected by that, while the American citizens that were like, oh yeah, I agree with what they're saying, they're drowning, like, help me. It's been like this for a long time. You look at one of the famous quotes from LBJ when he first entered office. He was the last Democratic president who got real, major, huge things done. And I'm not saying Joe Biden wouldn't do that if he could. If he had the numbers in the Senate, he would have done the same thing. He's done a lot more than Barack Obama and Bill Clinton did in their first terms in terms of legislative accomplishments. But LBJ said every bill that's on my desk was being debated when I first started the Senate decades ago, because he was talking about how stagnant things had gotten. He was talking about how Eisenhower and then the first term for the Kennedys, they kicked around a lot of stuff, but they didn't do a lot of stuff that people were talking about. And he'd be horrified at this time period we're in today. Absolutely stagnant and sclerotic and almost to the point of death, almost to the point of being a corpse. The United States has not passed a major amendment in 50 years. We haven't passed any amendments in 30 years. The last amendment that was passed was in the 90s, and it was about exactly when a pay raise for Congress would kick into effect. Now, that's not really a huge, a massive amount of thing, but we haven't even attempted major amendments in the last 50 years. So even though you have the majority of Americans saying it's not fair that the Electoral College picks our president, we need to have popular vote. Twice this century, we've had really bad presidents installed through the EC and not the popular vote. They're like, well, there's no point even bringing this up. There's no way an amendment will ever pass about this. And there's no way an amendment will ever pass to protect abortion rights. And all of these different things that you're seeing to where the majority of the country very clearly wants it, but it's not even really considered a possibility. And you keep going back to these issues that we're debating and talking about. And a sad thing for me is to see the lack of progress in going back to the moon. I almost can't believe that we were able to put a man on the moon in 1969 and then have several subsequent missions throughout the 70s putting people on the moon. And yet it's been 50 years. We haven't been back to the moon. People started talking about going literally 10 years ago. There were certain bills that were made. The Obama administration put certain things in through. Then the Trump administration said they were going to make it a major priority. Now the Biden administration says we can't wait to go back to the moon. Well, we've already passed the deadline. We were supposed to go back. I think it was last year was the initial time period. Now they're saying it won't be 2024. It might be 2025. Then I saw where it might be 2026. Then Elon Musk, because SpaceX is involved in it, he's saying, oh yeah, maybe by the end of the decade. This is really pathetic that back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, we were able to do several missions to the moon. There was no internet. There were no smartphones, personal computers. What the hell's that? The technology they were using wasn't even the metric system. The astronauts were trained on the American system of measurement. The metric system might have been used for NASA's internal calculations, but when it came to the astronauts themselves who were actually flying the missions and having to make on-the-fly calculations, they used the American system of measurement. So an imprecise system of measurement and technology that was more dated than what any of us carry around in our pockets with a smartphone every day, that was able to put multiple missions of men on the moon. Now, when we floated the idea 10 years ago and it's been hung up in committees and funding exercises and blah, 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 we don't know when we're going to go back. And I thought, how are you able to do this in the 70s? But here it is, the 2020s, and the best we can hope for is that the private space company that we funneled billions and billions of dollars to says, yeah, maybe by the end of the decade we can get it done. I'm not really sure. That is sad to think, does anything really change when we should have a base on the moon, a permanent base on the moon and permanent research station, no different than McMurdo in Antarctica. And we should have built this a long time ago. And now it might take us 10 full years from the time that we fully committed to putting a man on the moon to going back to the moon. What are we going to do in 2029 when somebody finally goes back to the moon and walks around and we're going to be like, oh my God, what a great moment. 70 years in the making since we literally did it about 70 years ago. This is not exciting shit for most people. And yet we're struggling to be able to do that. So does anything really change? Sometimes I'm doubtful because we're still having a lot of the same conversations. GIA, guns, immigration, abortion. These conversations have been out there for a long time and we're still having them. Global warming, I think, has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. And yet I can go anywhere in Alabama and still have a fucking debate about whether or not it's real. Right now in Los Angeles, because I'm in the supposed Sodom and Gomorrah of the country, the People's Republic of Los Angeles, as it's sometimes called, I'm disappointed that it's not as liberal as people seem to think it is. All the time growing up in Alabama, I heard, oh my God, Los Angeles, that's Sodom and Gomorrah, and everybody's an atheist and everybody has orgies. And of course, they're saying this as a warning, and I'm sitting there thinking like, yes, I can't wait to move there. I'm being held hostage in a church that I don't want to go to, while the Sunday school teacher or whatever is like, oh yeah, LA, y'all need to stay away from there. There's a lot of sex that goes on there. And I'm like, oh my God, give me a map. How do I get there? I can't wait to get there. I'm so excited. And then you get here and I'm driving down 3rd Street a few weeks ago and you see a giant creationist billboard. I almost couldn't believe it. This was in Koreatown, kind of the mid-city area. This is like the heart of Los Angeles. And there's a gigantic billboard that's a creationist billboard, basically casting doubt about Darwin was wrong and we didn't evolve from apes and God put us here. And then I saw it one week and then I drove back a few weeks later and some graffiti artist had crossed out the word God and they'd written Allah. And I thought, if that doesn't show you exactly maybe what's wrong with right now, that in 2024, the part people found offensive wasn't that creationism is real and that evolution is wrong and there's no such thing as evolution, which is fucking ridiculous for somebody to say that in this age. But then to cross out God and put Allah, really? And this is Los Angeles. This is the second biggest city in the country. This is one of the most liberal cities and supposedly the most liberal state. And in the heart of that city, there can be a creationist billboard and no wise-ass graffiti artist has scribbled out the markings and put, no, Darwin was right, you're wrong, or anything like that. Like, this is what we're having the debate about. And so if there is anything where I see people are talking about that's different a lot is this overhyped concept of artificial intelligence. I think people have really gone nuts talking about this. I see it all the time. Apparently it's going to put us all out of a job. But I can remember being at Auburn University 20 years ago, and then they assigned the book The End of Work, and it was about how automation was going to put us out of jobs. And that was 20 years ago. And a lot of the jobs they said would be fully automated by now, cashier work, janitorial work, things like that, they're not automated. They've made barely any progress on that at all. I go into stores and there is self-checkout lines, but not everybody uses them, and there's just as many cashiers today as there's ever been. Restaurants, they haven't automated most of that stuff, which they said that they were going to do, and janitorial positions. The artificial insanity I'm referring to is that it seems like the jobs that are going to be automated are software jobs that people actually like to do. ChatGPT is going to put writers out of business. People like to do that. I like to write books. I like to write my own things. I have concepts and ideas. There's more writers out there writing books than there will ever be an audience for. 90% of books are they're self-published ebooks, and the vast majority of those do not make $100. Most of them don't make $100. If you write a self-published ebook and release it, and you sell 1,000 copies, you're in the top 10 percentile. That's fantastic. Most of us don't think $1,000 is a great deal of money, because it isn't a great deal of money. A single restaurant meal for a family of 4 could be $200, and yet $1,000 is what most people, if they're lucky, could expect to make off a self-published ebook. Is no demand for software that can write screenplays and books and poetry, that can do graphic design and that can make photos and movie posters and even design itself. A lot of software engineers are being laid off at the big tech companies. They're like, yeah, this software, it can write itself. You almost wonder, like, who are the software engineers that are writing this? Like, your boss comes and is like, hey, I need you to make software that can do exactly what you do. Oh, sure thing, boss, no problem. Like, you're basically making your own job irrelevant. Who are the software engineers that are willing to take those jobs? Great news, Mark Zuckerberg. I just wrote this program that can do what all of us do, and it can do it for free, but you're still going to keep me on, right? No, you're fired, but thanks so much for that program. I really appreciate it, buddy. So the jobs people enjoy doing, painting, graphic design, writing, software design, those are being replaced by artificial intelligence, which is not really intelligent at all. It still takes 1,000 people to program it, and it goes through the charade that it's actually learning and talking to us, when we're really just talking to hollowed out code that can no more understand us than a dog can understand you. A dog can understand you better than a lot of these programs can understand you. I mean, it's like talking to a tree. But that's being replaced. But the physical jobs that people hate are not being replaced. Things that are very physically stressful. I think automation should be jobs that are dangerous, like a deep sea oil driller is very dangerous. There's a lot of jobs where the mortality rate's very high. A lot of stuff in the fossil fuel industry which shouldn't even exist. There should be solar panels everywhere. There really shouldn't even be fossil fuels. Jobs that are dangerous, jobs that are very physically stressful, like construction and agriculture. Agriculture, they can never find people to do it. They're begging people to do it. In California, there's been a farm worker crisis for years. And one of the few things that I disagree with what a lot of liberals about is whenever they talk about illegal immigration and they're like, oh, well, they're just doing jobs that Americans don't want to do and jobs that Americans won't do. Well, the illegal immigrants don't want to do those jobs either. California has more illegal immigrants than any state in the country. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but they just flat out do. And they can't find people to do this farm work. They're begging people to do farm work. They're throwing great wages and benefits at people sometimes, and in some cases to do this farm work. They don't want to fucking do it. Nobody wants to do it. So you'd think automation would start with very stressful, physical, intense jobs out in the sun like farm work and agriculture, where there's always a labor shortage and nobody wants to do it, and then leave us the arts that people like to do. Like you told farm workers, like, we're going to build this robot to do this essential farm work labor, but you are going to be able to write the books and screenplays and poetry and the music. You can make music and, maybe code. You can learn coding skills. You could do software, things like that. Most of them would jump at the chance, but it's reversed itself to where we've still got a man wiping shit out of a toilet at Walmart where somebody just had diarrhea everywhere, but then a robot is going to write books that nobody is wanting to even read because it's so saturated, and they're going to write screenplays so that Hollywood can lay off paying screenwriters, which everybody wants to do. If you're dying to break into the business, which I am and a lot of people are, and then you're like told, oh, don't worry about acting anymore. From now on, all the acting jobs are going to be played by James Dean. We've been able to resurrect him through code, and it's a funny story actually, but don't worry about it. We're going to do this. Well, no, we actually wanted to be rock stars and movie stars and sell out arenas, and they'll be like, we'll take it from here. This dated IP, like the IP now in theaters is so dated. It really does feel like nothing ever changes. You go to the movies and say, man, I haven't been to the movies in a while. What are my choices? Planet of the Apes, okay, that's from the 60s. Mad Max, that's from the 70s. King Kong versus Godzilla, those are from the 30s in King Kong's case. Is there anything new in a movie theater right now? Does anything really change? Well, both in politics and media, I would say no. And the only thing seeming to be changing is that the jobs people actually love and want to do are being replaced by robots, while the stuff we hate still pays $12 an hour for anybody willing to do it. Okay, guys, thanks for listening. I appreciate you. I'll try to do another episode soon. Thanks for listening.